Only the second of his presidency after traveling to Israel just yesterday. With tensions rising around the globe, the president will make a direct plea to the American people, saying there's an urgent need to keep money flowing to Israel and Ukraine. The president says it's a perilous moment for global democracy. CBS News has learned the president will ask Congress for roughly $100 billion over the next year, including $10 billion toward Israeli defense and $60 billion for Ukraine and its war against Russia. The package also includes money for Taiwan and U.S. border security. The Biden administration plans to give $100 million in humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, provided from already existing funds. Now, Gaza remains blocked off, its people unable to leave. Agreements have been made to get aid in, but the situation at this hour remains fluid. And also this new tonight, news of a U.S. Navy destroyer firing the first American shots of this conflict, taking down drones and missiles coming from Yemen, potentially heading towards Israel. Now, this Oval Office address will give the president a chance to explain to the people what the impact is to us here at home and around the world. Here now, the president.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We're facing an inflection point in history. One of those moments where the decisions we make today are going to determine the future for decades to come. That's what I'd like to talk with you about tonight. You know, early this morning, I returned from Israel. They tell me I'm the first American president to travel there during the war. I met with the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet. And most movingly, I met with Israelis who had personally lived through horrific horror of the attack by Hamas on the 7th of October. More than 1,300 people slaughtered in Israel, including at least 32 American citizens. Scores of innocents, from infants to the elderly grandparents. Israelis, Americans taken hostage. As I told the families of Americans being held captive by Hamas, we're pursuing every avenue to bring their loved ones home. As president, there is no higher priority for me than the safety of Americans held hostage. The terrorist group Hamas unleashed pure, unadulterated evil in the world. But sadly, the Jewish people know perhaps better than anyone that there is no limit to the depravity of people when they want to inflict pain on others. In Israel, I saw people who are strong, determined, resilient, and also angry, in shock and in deep, deep pain. I also spoke with President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, and reiterated that the United States remains committed to the Palestinian people's right to dignity and to self-determination. The actions of Hamas terrorists don't take that right away. Like so many other, I'm heartbroken by the tragic loss of Palestinian life, including the explosion at the hospital in Gaza, which was not done by the Israelis. We mourn every innocent life lost. We can't ignore the humanity of innocent Palestinians who only want to live in peace and have an opportunity. You know, the assault on Israel echoes nearly 20 months of war, tragedy, and brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine, people that were very badly hurt since Putin launched his all-out invasion. We've not forgotten the mass graves, the bodies found bearing signs of torture, rape used as a weapon by the Russians, and thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken into Russia, stolen from their parents. It's sick. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, and innocent Palestinian families are suffering greatly because of them. Meanwhile, Putin denies Ukraine has or ever had real statehood. He claims the Soviet Union created Ukraine. And just 2 weeks ago, he told the world that if the United States and our allies withdraw, and if the United States withdraw, our allies will as well, military support for Ukraine would have, quote, a week left to live, but we're not withdrawing. I know these conflicts can seem far away, and it's natural to ask, why does this matter to America? So let me share with you why making sure Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's national security. You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, They cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising. So if we don't stop Putin's appetite for power and control in Ukraine, he won't limit himself just to Ukraine. Putin's already threatened to remind Poland that their Western land was a gift from Russia. One of his top advisors, a former president of Russia, has called Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania Russia's Baltic provinces. These are all NATO allies. For 75 years, NATO has kept peace in Europe and has been the cornerstone of American security. And if Putin attacks a NATO ally, we will defend every inch of NATO which the treaty requires and calls for. We'll have something that we do not seek. Make it clear, we do not seek. We do not seek to have American troops fighting in Russia or fighting against Russia. Beyond Europe, we know that our allies, and maybe most importantly our adversaries and competitors, are watching. They're watching our response in Ukraine as well. And if we walk away and let Putin erase Ukraine's independence, would-be aggressors around the world would be emboldened to try the same. The risk of conflict and chaos could spread in other parts of the world, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, especially in the Middle East. Iran is supporting Russia in Ukraine, and is supporting Hamas and other terrorist groups in the region, and will continue to hold them accountable, I might add. The United States and our partners across the region are working to build a better future for the Middle East. One where the Middle East is more stable, better connected to its neighbors, and through innovative projects like the India-Middle East-Europe Rail Corridor that I announced this year at the summit of the world's biggest economies. More predictable markets, more employment, less rage, less grievances, less war when connected. It benefits the people who would benefit the people of the Middle East and would benefit us. American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keep us, America, safe. American values are what make us a partner that other nations want to work with. To put all that at risk, if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it. That's why tomorrow I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs, to support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine. Is a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations. Help us keep American troops out of harm's way. Help us build a world that is safer, more peaceful, more prosperous for our children and grandchildren. In Israel, we must make sure that they have what they need to protect their people today and always. The security package I'm sending to Congress and asking Congress to do is an unprecedented commitment to Israel's security that will sharpen Israel's qualitative military edge, which we've committed to, the qualitative military edge. We're going to make sure Iron Dome continues to guard the skies over Israel. We're going to make sure other hostile actors in the region know that Israel is stronger than ever and prevent this conflict from spreading. Look, at the same time, President Netanyahu and I discussed again yesterday the critical need for Israel to operate by the laws of war. That means protecting civilians in combat as best as they can. The people of Gaza urgently need food, water, and medicine. Yesterday, in discussions with the leaders of Israel and Egypt, I secured an agreement for the first shipment of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. If Hamas does not divert or steal these shipments, we're going to provide an opening for sustained delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians. As I said in Israel, as hard as it is, we cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution. Israel and Palestinians equally deserve to live in safety, dignity, and peace. You know, and here at home, we have to be honest with ourselves. In recent years, too much hate has given too much oxygen, fueling racism, the rise of anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia, right here in America. It's also intensified in the wake of recent events that led to the horrific threats and attacks that both shock us and break our hearts. On October 7th, terror attacks have triggered deep scars and terrible memories in the Jewish community. Today, Jewish families worried about being targeted in school, wearing symbols of their faith, walking down the street, or going out about their daily lives. You know, I know many of you in the Muslim American community, the Arab American community, the Palestinian American community, and so many others are outraged and heartened, saying to yourselves, here we go again with Islamophobia and distrust we saw after 9/11. Just last week, a mother was brutally stabbed. A little boy, here in the United States, a little boy who just turned 6 years old was murdered in their home outside of Chicago. His name was Wadiha, a proud American, a proud Palestinian American family. We can't stand by and stand silent when this happens. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia. And to all you hurting, those of you hurting, I want you to know I see you. You belong. And I want to say this to you. You're all America. You're all American. This is in a moment, in moments like these, when fear and suspicion, anger and rage run hard, that we have to work harder than ever to hold on to the values that make us who we are. We're a nation of religious freedom, freedom of expression. We all have a right to debate and disagree without fear of being targeted in schools or workplaces or in our communities. We must renounce violence and vitriol. See each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. When I was in Israel yesterday, I said that when America experienced the hell of 9/11, we felt enraged as well. While we sought and got justice, we made mistakes. So I cautioned the government of Israel not to be blinded by rage. And here in America, let us not forget who we are. We reject all forms of hate, whether against Muslim, Jews, or anyone. That's what great nations do, and we are a great nation. On Ukraine, I'm asking Congress to make sure we can continue to send Ukraine the weapons they need to defend themselves and their country without interruption, so Ukraine can stop Putin's brutality in Ukraine. They are succeeding. When Putin invaded Ukraine, he thought he would take Kyiv and all of Ukraine in a matter of days. Well, over a year later, Putin has failed, and he continues to fail. Kyiv still stands because of the bravery of the Ukrainian people. Ukraine has regained more than 50% of the territory Russian troops once occupied, backed by U.S.-led coalition of more than 50 countries around the world, all doing its part to support Kyiv. What would happen if we walked away? We are the essential nation. Meanwhile, Putin has turned to Iran and North Korea to buy attack drones and ammunition to terrorize Ukrainian cities and people. From the outset, I've said, I will not send American troops to fight in Ukraine. All Ukraine is asking for is help for the weapons, munitions, the capacity, the capability to push invading Russian forces off their land, and the air defense systems to shoot down Russian missiles before they destroy Ukrainian cities. Let me be clear about something. We send Ukrainian equipment sitting in our stockpiles. And when we use the money allocated by Congress, we use it to replenish our own stores, our own stockpiles with new equipment. Equipment that defends America and is made in America. Patriot missiles for air defense batteries, made in Arizona. Artillery shells manufactured in 12 states across the country, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, and so much more. You know, just as in World War II, today patriotic American workers are building the arsenal of democracy and serving the cause of freedom. Let me close with this. Earlier this year, I boarded Air Force One for a secret flight to Poland. There I boarded a train with blacked out windows for a 10-hour ride each way to Kyiv, to stand with the people of Ukraine ahead of the one-year anniversary of their brave fight against Putin. I'm told I was the first American to enter a war zone not controlled by the United States military since President Lincoln. With me was just a small group of security personnel and a few advisors. But when I exited that train and met Zelensky, President Zelensky, I didn't feel alone. I was bringing with me the idea of America, the promise of America. to the people who are today fighting for the same things we fought for 250 years ago: freedom, independence, self-determination. And as I walked through Kyiv with President Zelensky, with air raid sirens sounding in the distance, I felt something I've always believed, more strongly than ever before. America is a beacon to the world. Still. Whereas my friend Madeleine Albright said, the indispensable nation. Tonight, there are innocent people all over the world who hope because of us, who believe in a better life because of us, who are desperate not to be forgotten by us, and who are waiting for us. But time is of the essence. I know we have our divisions at home. We have to get past them. We can't let petty, partisan, angry politics get in the way of our responsibilities as a great nation. We cannot and will not let terrorists like Hamas and tyrants like Putin win. I refuse to let that happen. In moments like these, we have to remember who we are. We are the United States of America. The United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. My fellow Americans, thank you for your time. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
The President of the United States making the case that this is a perilous moment for democracy around the globe, and invoking America's ideals of freedom, and noting that we must come to many of these countries' defense, particularly noting the people here in America are building the arsenal of democracy, some of these weapons, just as the President is asking Congress for $100 billion in new aid. Let's bring in Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. And Margaret, much of the nation has been focused on what happened in Israel for the past 2 weeks, but the president also making the case for Ukraine tonight.
That's right, Nora. And this was something where he linked the two, saying that they are both direct threats to democracy, but also because if you don't stand up to a dictator or terrorist group, he said that could come as a direct threat to the United States. But he's explaining in these public remarks to the American people why it's in their interest to spend their taxpayer dollars on these things. I mean, Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid cumulatively since World War II, $150 billion. So for him to say tonight, as he did, that this is going to be an unprecedented commitment to Israel, that's a significant statement. But then turning to Ukraine and making the case that, frankly, Nora, many Republicans had criticized him for failing to make to the public, which was to explain why the United States has been pumping in tens of billions of dollars to help Ukraine fight Russia with its weapons. And he brought that home by mentioning this industrial policy, this idea of investing in rebuilding American stockpiles, and borrowed that Reagan phrase, America being the arsenal of democracy, but also tried to calm some tensions here at home, referencing this recent reaction to what happened in Israel and the spike in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
I want to also bring in our CBS News senior foreign correspondent, Charlie D'Agata, who is live for us in Tel Aviv. And Charlie, bring us up to date, everything that is happening on the ground there.
Yeah, well, you know, they would have been watching very closely here in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, Tehran, because of what's happened in the past sort of 24 hours since President Biden was here. The Israeli forces are gearing up for what we believe is going to be a ground offensive. The Israeli defense minister is saying to his troops that you are now going to see Gaza from the inside. We went there ourselves to watch Israeli forces training for what's about to come. And there's a sense here that Israeli forces are gearing up for some kind of ground incursion. At the same time, there's been outrage, partly what's happened at the hospital in Gaza and the explanations and controversy that's gone both ways. Regardless, the Israelis are saying that this is a Islamic Jihad that was responsible for the explosion at the hospital. But that's to one side, because what it has done is inflamed the entire region. There have been demonstrations in Egypt. There's been demonstrations in Jordan around these areas. So as the Israelis are gearing up for what will be an offensive in the past week and a half after the terrible massacres that happened here. It has inflamed the entire region, and one that has already involved the United States.
Charlie D'Agata, thank you. One other thing the president noting tonight is he has been pushing to get that humanitarian aid into Gaza, getting an agreement from the Egyptian president, and yet still that aid is sitting at the gate, not yet inside. Want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She is at the White House. The president making this request for $100 billion to help U.S. allies abroad, also for U.S. border security. And yet, Weijia, how likely is it that this will get through Congress anytime soon with no leader in the House?
Well, it's impossible, Nora, because in order to pass that funding request, you have to have a functioning Congress where both chambers can vote. And right now that is not possible because that doesn't exist without a Speaker of the House. And earlier today, I asked sources here, is the president going to call out Republicans in any way for the chaos that we are seeing on Capitol Hill, for not being able to elect a speaker? And they said, frankly, no, because this is not the right time for that. He's not going to waste this precious time to connect with the American public, to talk politics, but certainly they believe the message was delivered very clearly, because this is not only a matter of Israel and Ukraine, but of security for Americans here at home. Nora.
Weijia Jiang at the White House, where you can hear some of the protests outside there. The president making the case today that it is American leadership that holds the world together, and he will need the support of Congress in order to continue that funding. Our coverage will continue on CBS News streaming, your local news, and for some of you tonight on the CBS Evening News. And CBS News will have a prime time special, Israel, Hamas, the world on edge. That's tomorrow night at 10 p.m. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to CBS News Prime Time. I'm Jeff Glor, in for John Dickerson. President Biden addressed major global conflicts during his Oval Office speech Thursday night. The president said ensuring Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's security and called on Congress to approve an aid package, a big aid package. President Biden also called out Hamas and Russia for wanting to, quote, annihilate democracy.
Making sure Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's national security. You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising.
Let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, Israel and the Hamas war is front and center right now, but the president spent just as much time talking about Ukraine, if not more, and even compared Putin to Hamas in this speech.
Yeah, that was a pretty notable and somewhat effective, potentially effective, but certainly to this reporter's ear, effective way of sort of summarizing for skeptics or for those that maybe haven't been paying as much attention, sort of what's up here. And that is that there are two entities, one a country, the other a terrorist organization, that are trying to upend neighboring democracies. And this is a president who, since he was a candidate and certainly since he became president, has suggested that there's an ongoing global struggle between democracies and autocratic rulers or organizations that are trying to upend what has been the traditional world order. So what better way to describe it tonight than say these are two conflicts that the United States needs to be engaged in by supporting the democratically elected leaders of those two countries that are under threat. And it was a reminder, too, you're right, that after almost 2 weeks of sustained coverage and attention on the Middle East, he's reminding Americans and speaking about it in ways that he hasn't necessarily to the entire country in such an organized way, why the Ukraine conflict is so important, why it is costing tens of billions of taxpayer dollars, and why it needs to continue to spend that kind of money, lest U.S. troops be drawn in and there be American bloodshed. So we'll see in the coming days if it sticks. But, you know, new CBS News polling tonight, for example, suggests that most Americans aren't pleased with how he's been handling this so far. There's been skepticism and criticism of how he's explained, at least, the reason to engage in Ukraine. So the White House clearly tonight hoping that this kind of an address, the more traditional Oval Office speech that, connotes a more grave situation, a more serious one, will hopefully be absorbed by Americans and support for what he's asking for will grow.
It's also Ukraine something he can speak unequivocally on, is that we support Ukraine in this war. Yes, the U.S. stands by Israel, but he does have to walk that line of supporting Israel, but also the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And to that effect, he talked about the Palestinian boy who was shot or was killed in Chicago.
Yeah, there's a growing concern across the administration and certainly among Democrats that we could, because of this, see a revival of what he described as Islamophobia or anti-Muslim behavior and rhetoric and activity that we haven't seen really since the post-9/11 and Iraq war eras. And so don't be surprised if in the coming days you hear him speak about it more, you see the administration try to do more to draw concern to that. And look, I mean, the fate of that 6-year-old is a terrifying thing, no matter what his background is. And so by calling that out tonight and saying again that we don't accept that, not only sends a message here in the United States, but should reinforce, the White House would hope, around the world and certainly on the so-called Arab street, how seriously this president takes that kind of behavior and how much he abhors it.
So again, the president speaking tonight for just a little over 15 minutes, talking about both Ukraine and the war between Israel and Hamas. We have to take a quick break here. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me, and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. That's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
As we mentioned, President Biden is calling for billions of dollars in aid for Ukraine and Israel. He addressed the Israel-Hamas war and the need to support America's allies. He also acknowledged mistakes by the U.S. in past conflicts in the Middle East and cautioned Israel not to be blinded by rage. I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang, who was at the White House. Weijia, what message does the president's address send? Is the administration hoping to the rest of the world about the U.S.?
Well, he's hoping to say that the U.S. is the leader of the world, that it is remaining someone that can continue to work with allies. In fact, this is something that he said as soon as he took office. I remember very distinctly, Jeff, he said, America is back. Diplomacy is back at the center of foreign policy, which is exactly what we saw from the president today. But there is a split screen unfolding because President Biden said he was going to formally ask Congress for this massive aid package that we've been talking about for $100 billion that includes money for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for border security. But it's impossible to approve that money, Jeff, without a functioning Congress and a Speaker of the House. And so that is what other nations are also seeing right now, is this chaos among the American Congress, unable to elect a leader. But the president wanted to convey that it was here and not going to turn its back on allies. And I think, more importantly, he tried to stress what would happen if we did. This was not only about Israel and Ukraine. It was about Iran. It was about China. He said if we leave our allies behind, would-be aggressors are watching, and they are seeing that America is willing not to completely follow through here. And that is why he says this is a much bigger national security risk. That's why he says we need to continue funding both of these countries.
This is really sensitive, though, right now, Weijia, because Israel has been top of mind and the war with Hamas for good reason for 2 weeks now. And this is the president really trying to pull attention back to Ukraine. As I mentioned with Ed here, he spent as much, if not more time tonight talking about Ukraine than he did Israel. So how is the administration trying to strike that balance as they make that pivot? It's delicate.
It's very delicate. And, you know, it's important to note that before this conflict broke out in the Middle East, Republicans were very wary already of approving any more Ukraine funding. And now, as we mentioned, the White House is hoping to tie Ukraine funding to Israel, among other things. And Republicans are already calling this out and saying that, you know, that's not how this should be done, and we will not support it. You should not be tying these two things together to try to get it over the line. But the way the president views it, it's actually not two different things, because he would argue at the end of the day, again, it is all about national security. It is all about making sure that neither one of these conflicts expands and balloons and turns into a situation where the U.S. has to become involved even more. But you're right, this is a tough case. Even if there were a Speaker of the House, even if lawmakers were able to vote on this package that is going to be formally unveiled tomorrow by the White House, you know, it's very hard to say whether they would have the votes to actually approve it, because right now, especially among Republicans, there is no appetite to be spending this kind of money. And so there's a long way to go before this package or anything that resembles it is stamped and approved and funding starts to go out.
Very quickly before we let you go, Weijia, I just want to ask you, ahead. I was struck by the president comparing Putin to Hamas. I wanted to get your reaction to that.
I'm sorry, comparing what to Hamas, Jeff?
Putin to Hamas.
Yes, Putin to Hamas.
As he tied these two things together.
Yes. He said it's because they have one common goal, and that is to annihilate. Annihilate is the word he used and repeated, a neighbor. And so that is why he is drawing these comparisons and conclusions and saying that even though obviously the circumstances in these conflicts in Russia and the Middle East are very different, the goal by the aggressor is the same. And so that's why he says the U.S. needs to wake up and be there for its allies, because if either one of those countries were to lose, it could spill over into a much bigger conflict that involves the world.
Okay, Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, thanks very much. We're going to bring in CBS News' Tina Kraus now. She is in Tel Aviv. Tina, I know we haven't been able to get full reaction to how Israelis feel about the president's speech tonight, but they are reacting to his visit to Tel Aviv. How do they feel about that?
Absolutely. Well, Israelis told me that for the 7 hours that President Biden was on the ground here in Tel Aviv, they felt a sense of hope, a hope that they could get through this nightmare that began on October 7th and continues as the families of these hostages wait to get their loved ones back. They say that having the U.S. on their side makes them feel good, that they are able to move forward and know that President Biden is going to get this unprecedented package to help Israel defend itself. So, you know, having the most powerful nation in the world here on their side is something that they're very glad about.
The president, this meeting with Arab leaders, as you know, was canceled in part because of the strike that happened at the hospital. And even though the Israelis were not behind that, there's been a lot of controversy over that. But the president is still attempting to make clear, as he did in this speech tonight, that he's still speaking with these leaders, even if he's not meeting with them in person.
Yeah, exactly. And he wants to make it clear that Hamas is Hamas. The Palestinian people are something else. And he was hoping to be able to go to those Arab countries, but he still has been speaking with them to know that the Palestinian people here have just the same rights as well. He wants them to know that Israelis and Palestinians, he still said tonight that he hopes that there will be peace, that there hopes there will be a two-state solution. He brought that to the table in the speech. So, yeah, I mean, that's the message, that both sides deserve good treatment.
From what you're seeing and hearing on the ground, Tina, I just wonder how things have you seen things change over the past 12 or 13 days?
Well, in the time that I've been here, I have heard a lot more air raid sirens. I've seen a lot of rockets coming this way from Gaza. And I think that there is just a real sense from Israelis that I'm talking to that they want this ground invasion to begin. They want to get in there to, frankly, get revenge for what has happened and to get these hostages back. And they've got a real job ahead of them, Israeli troops, as you know. I mean, they're parked now with their tanks at the border. They're waiting for the order to roll. And once they go in, the Gaza Strip is 25 miles long. It's a huge place that is so densely populated, and it's full of this sophisticated underground fortified tunnels that Hamas operates within. It's known as the Gaza Metro. So getting in there and finding these hostages is going to be a long and painstaking task. It's going to take a lot of patience, a lot of intelligence. We know that the Pentagon also sent in a team of special ops forces to help Israelis pinpoint the location of these hostages, but it's going to take time and a bit of luck to bring them home.
Okay, Tina Kraus in Tel Aviv, thank you so much. We want to bring in Gerald Feierstein now. He is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. He was also a 41-year career diplomat who served in 7 nations, including Yemen, where he was U.S. Ambassador. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Let me just start with this. The president's speech tonight, what did you make of it? Were you surprised by anything?
It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, Jeff. No, I think that the president's speech was pretty well previewed, that we knew where he was going to go with this. I think one thing that I was pleased about was the emphasis he placed on the Palestinian issue as well as the Israeli issue, that it can't only be about Israel responding to this Hamas atrocity, but it also has to do with trying to protect innocent Palestinian lives, to make sure that humanitarian relief gets into them, but also to try to limit the Israeli operations so that we don't have a lot of Palestinian casualties.
Ambassador, the Biden administration has not paid much attention to the Middle East until this happened. Was that a mistake?
Well, you know, the old saying is that we may want to move away from the Middle East, but the Middle East doesn't want to move away from us. And so, you know, there is this issue that not only this administration, but its predecessors with the pivot to Asia, the idea that the concerns that the U.S. should be confronting are in Russia and China, and that the Middle East really was not an area where the U.S. could make significant progress. I think, unfortunately, there has been an abdication of responsibility by successive U.S. administrations to try to address the fundamental issues that divide Israelis and Palestinians that really is underlying all of these explosions of violence that we're seeing.
Why is that? Because do some of these administrations just say, we give up?
I think that there was a sense that the parties were not prepared on either side, that there was no quote unquote partner for peace in either Israel or the Palestinian territories, that neither side was prepared to make the compromises, and that therefore there was really no prospect. John Kerry tried very hard in the Obama administration to try to get some agreement, to try to get some progress, without much success. So this is, I think it's, frankly speaking, an issue that successive administrations have looked at and said this is a loser.
Ambassador, do you think it's going to be problematic for the Biden administration to tie aid for Israel to aid to Ukraine?
Well, I think that fundamentally my own sense, and your correspondent in Washington probably has her finger on the pulse more than I do, but my sense is that the president will get the funding, that he will win the battle. I think that on both the Republican and Democratic sides, there is support for both Israel and Ukraine. But there's also a fundamental difference, which is that in Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, ultimately what we need to do is get back to a political process. There's not a military solution. Whereas in Ukraine, I think the fundamental objective is that we have to give the Ukrainians what they need in order to achieve a military victory that forces the Russians to withdraw.
Ambassador Gerald Feuerstein, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go back to CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe for some final thoughts here. Ed, how quickly does the administration want to try to get this funding package through?
Well, we anticipate now that they will formally send it to Congress tomorrow morning. And again, it's expected to include a suite of global security concerns, but also domestic ones. Don't be surprised to see funding in there for disaster relief, like the fires in Hawaii or other anticipated natural disasters in the coming weeks. There may be some other requests for domestic concerns, like the so-called child care cliff, or the aid that's been going to families to pay for child care. This is designed to be an emergency spending plan. That's what they call it in essence, and designed to also get Congress and the White House through next year's election so that Congress and Washington generally doesn't get mired in this kind of stuff at the height of an election season that's already set to be so tumultuous. So again, it'll depend on how quickly there's a speaker. It'll depend on how quickly Republicans, once they've reorganized in the House, can get together with Republicans in the Senate and figure out what to them is acceptable. To your question about how quickly can this move and is it smart to put all this together, certainly the White House and Democrats think so, and there are some Republicans who agree. Better to just do this all in one big package. But there will be holdouts, conservative holdouts, who say, no, this is the kind of stuff we shouldn't be doing anymore in Washington because it's expensive. There isn't enough accountability. We'll see how the debate goes, but it's not going to be over anytime soon. Just as this war in the Middle East is going to continue to rage, just as the situation in Ukraine continues to play out, getting Washington to agree on some basic things remains a real domestic challenge and one that isn't going to get solved anytime soon.
Speaking of conservative holdouts, if people keep lunging at Matt Gaetz or Kevin McCarthy or whatever happened there, behind closed doors. I don't mean to, it's not to laugh at it, but it is pretty striking how Republicans have a difficult time, to say the very least, coming together here to find a speaker. As long as that continues, none of this goes forward?
No. I mean, the Senate can certainly try in a bipartisan fashion to begin moving this big proposal from the president, but even there you'll find some resistance. And even if they were to pass it, say, in the next 3 weeks, which is still a tall order for the Senate, what's to say the House will be organized enough yet to get it done? And we can get really technical here for a second. Does this become the vehicle that also keeps the government open? Because remember, the deadline's coming just before Thanksgiving? Or is this going to be done separate of that as just emergency funding? And then we'll also have a separate fight on whether or not to keep the lights on across the federal government. That's the trickiness of what the president and congressional leaders, whoever they are, will face in the coming weeks. And it's just, again, an example of how perilous American politics have become, and how the world watches this and says, how can we trust the United States to be, that stable, able ally if they're squabbling amongst themselves over issues like this? We'll see.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, Ed, because McCarthy lost his speakership in large part because he wanted to keep the government open. Right. And then Jim Jordan was saying, if I'm not incorrect here, that he also wants to keep the government open, and now he's having the problems.
Exactly. And it's that small group of conservative lawmakers that are tying this up, it would appear. And we'll see. And God forbid things get worse in either of these conflicts, or something unforeseen happens, and we still have this stalemate. One wonders if it will compel Republicans to get it done faster, or whether it's just going to make the crisis that they're facing so much more acute to everyone else.
Ed, you and I have both been around long enough to know the unforeseen always happens.
Yes, it does.
Ed O'Keefe, always great to see you. Thanks for your time.
Take care.
Still ahead here, Israel is preparing for a potential ground invasion in Gaza. We are going to have some new details on the operations next. You're streaming CBS News.
I'm here. Fire rescue is out. They're doing wellness checks when people are trapped inside their homes.
How's the pay? A lot better. That's you and the Queen. That's beautiful.
An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely. As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The Israeli military appears to be in its final stages of preparations for a full-scale ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. But the timing of that offensive remains unclear. Here's Charlie D'Agata.
The Israeli military resumed its ferocious bombardment of Gaza after the briefest of breaks during President Biden's visit here yesterday. Gaza's health ministry says the death toll has soared to nearly 4,000, if it hasn't topped that already, as they count the bodies recovered by the moment. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled to escape the aerial onslaught and find food and shelter ahead.